They taught you to believe that freedom was yours from birth, that every thought in your mind belonged to you, that every choice you made rose from your own will. But what if that belief was the first illusion? What if the life you call your own, the desires that drive you, the fears that drain you, even the doubts that whisper in the dark, were never truly yours to begin with? What if they were placed there, shaped with such precision, such patience, that you would defend the prison without ever seeing its walls? The ancient Gnostics, seekers of hidden wisdom long buried beneath the surface of history, warned of beings they called the Archons, not devils in the simple religious sense, not the familiar demons of Scripture, but something colder, subtler, and far more dangerous. Forces of distortion that do not need to rule the outer world if they can quietly rule the world within you. They understood that the most effective cage is the one you cannot see, the one built not around the body, but inside perception itself, where thought can be redirected, desire manipulated, fear amplified, and consciousness slowly bent away from truth. And here is the secret they believed humanity was never meant to fully remember. This prison has no bars, no walls, no chains. It is an invisible cage constructed inside your own mind, using your own power against you. The same inner force that was meant to shape reality, to awaken remembrance, to connect you to something divine, has been captured and turned into the very mechanism that keeps you trapped in cycles of distraction, confusion, and forgetfulness. For thousands of years, humanity has walked through this unseen structure believing it was free, never realizing that its thoughts could be harvested, redirected, and fed upon by forces it could neither name nor detect. The Gnostics hid these teachings in fragments, in scrolls, in secret initiations, preserving them across centuries, as if they were waiting for a time when human consciousness would begin to rise again, when a few would finally remember what had been lost. And if you are hearing these words now, perhaps you are not here by accident. Perhaps you are one of the rare few who can already feel that something is wrong, one of the seekers, one of the awakened, one of those who came into this life to remember. Because once you begin to see what the Archons really are, and how deeply their deception reaches into human perception, you will never look at your mind, your life, or reality itself in the same way again. Before the world was arranged into familiar stories, before creation was given neat names and sealed inside doctrines, there were whispers of another vision, older, stranger, and almost erased. It moved quietly beneath the surface of history, like a current under stone, suggesting that what we call reality may not be the whole of it, and that what humanity has taken for normal may have been shaped by forces we were never taught to notice. In 1945, beneath the desert sands of Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a farmer uncovered a sealed clay jar, and inside it were writings that had remained hidden for more than 1,600 years. Among them were Gnostic texts and gospels that did not simply offer another belief system, but opened a very different atmosphere around existence itself. They spoke of a hidden cosmic conflict, not a war of swords, armies, or visible empires, but a silent battle over perception, memory, and the human bond with the divine source. In those writings, the deepest danger was not death, but forgetting where consciousness comes from, forgetting what lives within you, forgetting that beneath fear, beneath conditioning, beneath the noise of the world, there is something in the human being that does not belong to the machinery of control. According to the Gnostics, the visible world was not shaped in fullness by the ultimate divine source, but seized and organized by a lesser force, a false creator often called the Demiurge, a blind architect so cut off from the greater reality that it mistook its own limitation for absolute power. And this is where the story becomes less like theology and more like a mirror held up to the hidden anxieties of the soul. The Gnostics described a cosmic fracture that began before human history as we know it, a tragedy linked to Sophia, the embodiment of divine wisdom, whose action without full harmony brought forth a flawed being. Yaldabaoth, also remembered in distorted forms as Yelabath, lion-faced, serpent-bodied, flashing with the terrible confidence of ignorance. From that distortion came a structure, not merely a creature. Yaldabaoth brought forth 12 Archons aligned with the zodiac, 7 planetary rulers bound to the wandering stars, and beyond them, 365 Archons tied to the very days of the year, as if time itself had been folded into a system of containment. The image the Gnostics left behind is haunting, a vast cosmic machine, intricate and nearly invisible, built to keep consciousness moving in circles, locked in repetition, illusion, and submission, without ever recognizing the pattern. These Archons were not portrayed as noble rulers or guardians of sacred order. The word itself comes from the Greek for ruler or authority. Yet in the Gnostic imagination, they were something far more unsettling. Powers that govern by distortion, entities that hovered just beyond ordinary perception, not creating life but bending it, not generating truth but imitating it badly enough to confuse the mind and seduce the senses. They were described less as kings and more as parasites of awareness, feeding on fragmentation, on fear, on the inner chaos that makes a human being easier to direct. The Gnostics believed these forces did not need to dominate the world outside you if they could quietly condition the world within you. A mind filled with false urgency, restless craving, self-doubt, envy, guilt, and fear becomes easier to steer without ever realizing it is being steered. A person can spend an entire life defending a cage they cannot see. That is why this knowledge was treated as dangerous, even heretical, by early Orthodox authorities. Libraries were burned, teachings were buried, voices were silenced, not only because these ideas were strange, but because they threatened the settled story of who holds power over meaning. And yet fragments survived. They remained hidden beneath centuries of doctrine, ritual, and cultural habit, like embers waiting under ash. The Gnostics seemed to understand that if these teachings were ever recovered, they would not merely change what people believed about the universe. They would disturb the deeper assumption that the systems shaping human desire, status, distraction, competition, and fear are natural. What if they are not natural at all? What if the endless pressure to compare, to chase, to perform, to seek fulfillment in things that never satisfy is not just a social habit, but part of a much older pattern of estrangement? And what if, beneath all of it, there still remains within each person a divine spark, a fragment of the true source, untouched by the false architecture built around it? The Gnostics believed the Archons could not destroy that spark. They could only keep you from remembering it. They could keep you busy, tired, overstimulated, emotionally scattered, forever reaching outward and never turning toward the quiet center where something original still waits. If that is true, then the deepest prison was never made of iron or stone. It was made of forgetfulness. And the most unsettling possibility of all is that humanity may have lived inside it for ages, calling it freedom. And if the prison is made of forgetfulness, then the next question becomes impossible to ignore. How is that forgetfulness maintained so perfectly that most people never even suspect it is there? The Gnostics suggested that the Archons do not rely on force in the way human rulers do. They do not need armies marching across the earth or weapons raised against the body. Their method is quieter, subtler, and far more intimate. They work through thought, through perception, through the invisible lens by which you interpret your life. This is what makes the old Gnostic vision feel so unsettling even now. It implies that influence can enter consciousness without announcing itself, that a thought can appear in your mind in the sound of your own voice, carrying your own emotional tone and still not truly belong to you. The ancients described this as a kind of psychic interference, not always dramatic, not always dark in the obvious sense, but like a faint whisper moving through a silent room, so close to your own inner speech that you mistake it for yourself. One moment you feel centered, clear, present, and the next, without warning, a wave of self-doubt rises from nowhere. You are not enough. You will fail. Why even try? The Gnostics would ask a question most people almost never pause long enough to ask. Did that thought come from the deepest part of you, or did it arrive uninvited? This is where the teaching moves from strange mythology into something almost painfully personal, because the Archons were said to operate through states of fear and emotional turbulence, through frequencies of anger, envy, guilt, shame, and despair. Not simply because these feelings hurt, but because they cloud discernment and make consciousness easier to influence. The longer a person remains trapped in those states, the more open the inner field becomes to confusion, reaction, compulsion, and subtle forms of control. But the Gnostics did not stop at the level of the individual mind. They believed these forces also shape the collective atmosphere of human life, bending culture, systems, and inherited values so gently that people feel they are choosing freely while being guided toward the same patterns again and again. Why do so many spend their lives chasing things that never truly satisfy? Why does the promise of fulfillment keep moving just beyond reach, always attached to the next purchase, the next achievement, the next relationship, the next identity, the next victory over someone else? Why do entire societies become addicted to comparison, competition, performance, and endless stimulation, while the inner life grows weaker, quieter, more forgotten? The Gnostics would not have seen this as random. They might have said that the most effective way to control a species is to keep its attention scattered, to keep people flooded with noise, exhausted by manufactured conflict, consumed by desires that multiply faster than they can ever be fulfilled, because a consciousness that is constantly pulled outward becomes easier to steer. An attention span shattered into fragments cannot turn inward for very long. This is why the Archons were described as energy parasites. The idea was not only that they distort thought, but that they feed upon the energy released by inner fragmentation, by fear spirals, by rage, by shame, by the constant leaking of life force into reactions that never liberate the person trapped inside them. There is a trap hidden within the trap itself, to keep humanity fighting shadows while never questioning the deeper structure that generates them, to keep people locked in endless battles over status, politics, identity, possession, grievance, and division, anything that prevents the turning inward where direct remembrance begins. Because the moment a person begins to remember, the pattern starts to weaken. The Gnostics believed there is within you an awareness the Archons cannot reach, but if you are led to forget it, you may never live from it. That is why the attack is not only on your thoughts, but on your very sense of self. Doubt who you are. Compare yourself constantly. Chase what empties you. Scroll endlessly through noise. Seek everywhere except within, and the spell holds. But once you begin to suspect that the spell exists, once you begin to notice the patterns rather than obey them, something changes. The illusion does not vanish all at once, but a crack appears in its surface, and through that crack, another possibility begins to breathe. And once that crack appears, even faintly, the old architecture of control no longer feels as solid as it once did, because you begin to sense that the Archons may not be working only through private thoughts and emotions, but through the wider fabric of reality that surrounds human life. The Gnostics hinted that these forces operate not only within the psyche, but through time, repetition, and the subtle shaping of collective narratives, bending patterns so that history seems to move forward while secretly circling the same wounds. Civilizations rise, collapse, and rise again. Empires change names, symbols change clothing. The language becomes modern, the tools become digital, the conflicts become more sophisticated, yet the same divisions, the same seductions, the same fears return with new masks. The Gnostics would have looked at this not simply as political failure or human weakness, but as a labyrinth built into the world of appearances, a kind of cosmic repetition in which humanity is kept walking familiar corridors while believing it is choosing new directions. In that sense, the prison was never merely personal. It was woven into the emotional weather of entire societies, into cultural obsessions, into waves of fear and desire that sweep across millions of people at once. And where emotional waves gather, energy gathers. Where energy gathers, something feeds. This is why the ancient writings suggest that the Archons are not satisfied with influencing individuals alone. They work through systems, through imitation truths, through entire climates of thought that make distortion feel normal and remembrance feel strange. More unsettling still, the Gnostics warned that spiritual teachings themselves could be infiltrated, softened, inverted, or reduced to decorative forms, comforting the ego while leaving the deeper sleep untouched. Over centuries, symbols can be rewritten, rituals emptied, language hollowed out, and living insight turned into performance. A seeker may be offered endless techniques, teachers, formulas, and identities, always another promise, always another outer path, while the simplest and most dangerous invitation of all is quietly avoided. Turn inward and encounter directly the divine spark the system cannot control. That may be why false awakening can be more binding than ordinary ignorance, because it gives the feeling of movement without real transformation, the appearance of light without the fire of inner remembrance. The Gnostics seem to understand that deception becomes strongest when it borrows the language of truth. And yet, hidden within this dark vision, there is a paradox so important that everything begins to change around it. The Archons can influence, but they cannot create. They can imitate, but they cannot originate. They can distort reality in the mind, but they cannot extinguish the source from which true awareness rises. Their power depends on unconscious participation, on agreement given in sleep, on stories repeated until they feel like identity. Break the story, and the spell begins to thin. Not because the outer world instantly changes, but because your relationship to it changes. And that shift is not small. It is the beginning of sovereignty. The Gnostics left behind not only warnings, but a method, quiet and inward, less a ritual of domination than an act of remembering. They taught that liberation does not begin by attacking the Archons, but by seeing them, because what is seen clearly loses part of its power to hide. In the simplest terms, this means learning to witness the movement of thought without becoming fused with it, learning to notice the emotional hooks that pull your energy outward, learning to pause before reaction and ask what in you is speaking. Is it fear? Is it inherited programming? Is it the old machinery of comparison, shame, and urgency? Or is there something deeper beneath it, something still, luminous, and difficult to manipulate? This is where gnosis begins, not as abstract belief, but as direct knowing, a moment of stillness, a thought observed rather than obeyed, a breath taken before the spiral forms, a hand placed over the heart as attention is drawn back from the noise of the world and into the quiet interior space where awareness itself can be felt. The Gnostics believe that every time you withdraw energy from fear, rage, envy, or compulsive distraction, you loosen the hold of the system that feeds on those states. In returning to presence, you stop giving the prison your consent. And each time you remember that your deepest essence is not the voice of panic, not the mask of performance, not the hunger that never ends, the invisible structure weakens. And perhaps that is the more intimate meaning of the divine spark. Not a grand idea to admire from a distance, but the living point within you that remains untouched, the part of you that was never fully captured, never fully rewritten, never fully convinced by the story of separation. If that is so, then this moment matters more than it first appears. Not because you are being told what to believe, but because something in you may already have sensed that the world is louder than it needs to be, more fragmented than it should be, more seductive, and more empty than it first appears. Maybe that quiet unease was never a flaw. Maybe it was the beginning of remembrance. And if enough people begin to feel that, not as panic, but as clarity, not as rebellion for its own sake, but as a return to what is deepest and most real, then the invisible architecture begins to fail. The old spell does not break through violence. It breaks through awareness. It breaks when a person remembers that attention is sacred, that inner silence is not emptiness, but contact, and that no force of distortion can fully govern a consciousness that has learned to see. And maybe that is enough for now, not as an answer forced into words, but as a quiet recognition of something you may have already felt beneath the surface. If certain parts of this journey seemed strangely familiar, if something in you became still while listening, if old questions rose without asking permission, none of that has to be meaningless. Not every inner movement arrives to be explained. Some things arrive simply to be noticed. You are not late to this path. You are not drifting as far as it once seemed. And whatever has been opening in you has not been lost. The tension, the searching, the sense that something hidden has been pressing gently at the edge of your awareness, all of it can belong to this moment exactly as it is. There is no need to force it into certainty. Sometimes remembrance is quiet. Sometimes it comes as a soft return to yourself, as if something long buried has only just begun to breathe again. If these ideas stayed with you, if they touched a place deeper than thought, then perhaps this season is already speaking in its own way. And from here, the path does not close. It simply continues into the next layer of what has been waiting to be seen. To me, this kind of story feels powerful not because it tries to force a belief, but because it touches that quiet place in so many people that has always sensed something deeper behind the surface of ordinary life. It feels less like a doctrine and more like a mirror, one that reflects our fear, our longing, and the strange feeling that we were meant to remember more than we were taught to see. I'd really love to know how this felt to you, so tell me in the comments, what part of this video stayed with you the most? And have you ever felt that something in this world was gently pulling you away from your deeper self? If this message resonated with you, write "I remember" below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep walking deeper into these hidden layers together. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting the channel.